Hummingbad grows into an Android pandemic. Eleanor and pseudo-DarkLeech are also circulating in cybercriminal circuits. The ThinkPwn zero-day has a wider scope than previously thought. Industry notes and responses to ISIS attacks, inspiration, and command and control. The FBI closes its investigation into the former Secretary of State's emails. No indictments, but some harsh words for state and its former leader. Time to take a moment and tell you about our sponsor, E8 Security. They're putting your data together with E8's analytics for security that can handle the unknown unknowns. Consider what might warn you off to malware on your system. Listening or running programs on a rare or never-seen-before open port is one of them. It's easy to say that, but could you say what counted as rare or never seen before? Or would that information jump out as you reviewed logs, if you had time to review your logs? And by the time the logs reached you, the news would be old. But E8's analytical tools recognize and flag that threat at once, enabling you to detect, hunt, and respond. Get the free white paper at e8security.com/DHR and get started. E8 Security, your trusted partner. We thank E8 for sponsoring the CyberWire. I'm Dave Bittner in Baltimore with your CyberWire summary for Wednesday, July 6th, 2016. Many security types are mulling the significance of Hummingbad, an ad fraud campaign that's believed to have infected some 85 million Android devices worldwide. The infestation amounts to something of a pandemic in the Android population. According to researchers at Check Point, Hummingbad is a criminal operation that's bringing in some $300,000 a month for the Chinese Ying mob. According to Check Point, Hummingbad has been installed by drive-by download. Adult sites were also common infection vectors. Once exposed, Hummingbad first deploys a rootkit able to exploit several vulnerabilities. Should the rootkit fail to establish access, Hummingbad delivers a fake system update notification, which often succeeds in duping victims into granting the attackers system-level permissions. Fortune and others characterize Yingmob as an ad firm, which seems right if not particularly exculpatory. While Hummingbad at present seems to be sticking to its click fraud last, observers worry that the malware could easily be turned to other uses. Infected devices could easily be herded into a botnet, for example, and the surveillance potential of Yingmob's product has surely not escaped the usual array of state and non-state actors. Many conclude that Yingmob would welcome fresh market opportunities. Bitdefender reports having found a new strain of Mac malware. They're calling it Eleanor and say it's downloaded under the guise of a bogus document conversion app, EasyDoc Converter, which the unwary download. Needless to say, EasyDoc Converter doesn't convert docs or do much of anything else beyond opening a back door in infected OS X devices. Eleanor checks its potential victim for Little Snitch, a Mac OS X application firewall, and also for previous Eleanor infections. If it finds neither, infection proceeds, installing a Tor hidden service, a PHP web service, and a pastebin agent. Bitdefender doesn't say what the malware's purpose is, but it could easily be used for data theft or spamming. Bitdefender does note that EasyDoc Converter isn't an app that Apple signed, so as always, download outside the App Store only with extreme caution. The ThinkPwn zero-day, which poses a controversial but non-negligible risk, has been found to have a wider scope than first believed. Originally held to affect UEFI drivers on laptops, mostly Lenovo but also HP, it's now been found in the firmware of motherboards sold by Gigabyte. There's no fix out yet, although security analysts seem to think Lenovo may be, or should be, working on one. Pseudo-DarkLeech, the campaign Sucuri discovered in March 2015, continues morphing to evade detection. SANS says the ransomware campaign has eliminated large blocks of telltale code and shifted the exploit kit it uses from Angler to Neutrino. Angler, as we've seen, has essentially disappeared from the crimeware toolbox. Researchers are keeping an eye out for its potential return in some revenant form. These retail threats are the sort of thing any ordinary user might be concerned about. We've often heard about the importance of backing up your data to protect yourself against the most serious consequences of a ransomware attack. Today we hear about another way of protecting yourself or your business, what you should consider when choosing and setting up a router. The Johns Hopkins University's Joe Kerrigan shared some advice with us, and we'll hear from him after the break. In industry news, Symantec's stock price enjoyed a strong June surge, driven principally by investor optimism over its $4.65 billion acquisition of Blue Coat. Shares rose by more than 18%. In the UK, startup Darktrace picked up $64 million in its latest funding round. The investors were led by KKR. Existing investors Summit Partners and new investors 1011 Ventures and SoftBank also participated. The funding puts Darktrace almost halfway to unicorn status. Turning to conflict law and politics, many observers think ISIS's end of Ramadan wave of massacres may have gone too far. States opposing the self-proclaimed caliphate, notably France, are revising their intelligence approaches to counter-terrorism, but it remains unknown whether murder displayed online is losing its appeal to the caliphate's core demographic of the disaffected in search of transcendence. While ISIS-controlled territory continues to shrink, the group has shown no decrease in its ability to inspire lone wolves, and the recent round of attacks has led many analysts to conclude that ISIS has shown a new ability and propensity to directly control and coordinate terrorist cells. In the U.S., the FBI yesterday declined to recommend indictment of former Secretary of State Clinton for mishandling classified information. FBI Director Comey said in an unusual public statement that former Secretary Clinton and her associates did indeed mishandle such, and that foreign intelligence services probably gained access to her private emails. But the director said other elements that would normally warrant prosecution were lacking. Comey said, quote, "In looking back at our investigations into mishandling or removal of classified information, we cannot find a case that would support bringing criminal charges on these facts. All the cases prosecuted involved some combination of clearly intentional and willful mishandling of classified information, or vast quantities of materials exposed in such a way as to support an inference or intentional misconduct, or indications of disloyalty to the United States, or efforts to obstruct justice. We do not see those things here." End quote. Beyond the decision not to recommend indictment, the director's statement hardly constituted a letter of recommendation, citing as it did extreme carelessness in handling classified information. The FBI also had some starchy words for the State Department, finding states' security culture a lot more loosey-goosey than the culture prevailing elsewhere in the federal government. Given that the federal government includes, for example, OPM, well, we note in fairness that the State Department publicly dissented from that assessment in its own statements. This CyberWire podcast is made possible by the generous support of Cylance, offering revolutionary cybersecurity products and services that proactively prevent, rather than reactively detect, the execution of advanced persistent threats and malware. Learn more at cylance.com. And joining me once again is Joe Kerrigan from the Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute. Joe, we're talking about setting up a new Wi-Fi router in our house. What are some of the basic security steps that we need to take to make sure that that router is secure as it needs to be?
First thing you need to do is when you connect to this router, you go into the web interface and you change the admin password from the default. That is paramount importance because it's very well known what these admin usernames and passwords are. And if someone can get on your network and you haven't changed that, they can do whatever they want to your router. It's
remarkable how many people don't do that and keep, usually it's admin password or the username and default password, right?
Right, yeah. And it's very common. There's a lot of times where things are just even not necessarily routers, but say IP cameras that just have outward-facing IP addresses that have the default username and password on them.
So there's some other settings you should go in there and check. You got to make sure your encryption's turned on.
Correct. You got to make sure that your Wi-Fi encryption's turned on and set to something better than WEP. That's already been cracked, and I think there are tools that can do it in 45 seconds, depending on your processor speed and how much time and bandwidth you have. Also, I changed the password to access the network. Make sure the password to access the network is not the same as the one that's printed on the outside of the router.
Oh, right. Because particularly from your cable provider, that come with a
correct. A lot of the ones
printed on there.
Right. Like I have a Verizon router, and the Wi-Fi password for the default settings is printed on the outside of that router.
And you also, what about controlling inbound traffic? That's something you want to check out, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. You want to keep that turned off. You want to make sure that there's no way for somebody to access the web interface to manage that router from the outside. That most of the routers I've seen in setting up these routers for myself and my family, that's disabled by default. You can't you can't access the management interface from the outside. But you can enable that, and I would recommend you don't enable that because you really don't need to manage your home Wi-Fi network from work.
Right. Some of these things they are sort of basic things, but it's remarkable how often people don't think of them. They overlook them, or they're just in a hurry and don't bother to change them. So, it's a good reminder.
Yeah, to take the time to make it right.
All right, Joe Kerrigan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, along with interviews, our glossary, and more, visit thecyberwire.com. Thanks to all of our sponsors who make the CyberWire possible. If you'd like to place your product, service, or solution in front of people who want it, you'll find few better places to do that than the CyberWire. Visit thecyberwire.com/sponsors to find out how to sponsor our podcast or daily news brief. The CyberWire podcast is produced by Pratt Street Media. The editor is John Petrick. Our social media editor is Jennifer Iben, and our technical editor is Chris Russell. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie. I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening.